There's about 35,000 of us guys out here at Mare Island. We're working 24 hours a day, fixing up busted ships and building new ones. Talk about your total war effort. Brother, we got it here at Mare Island.
Hello, everybody. I'm Justin Crosley.
This is Ryan Gibbons.
I'm Kent Fortner.
And this is Battleships to Beer, 10 years of Mare Island Brewing Co.
Woo-hoo.
Yeah.
Has it really been 10 years?
It sure has, Ryan. It sure has.
It feels like 20. That's all I'm asking here.
Right.
Plenty to talk about.
So the Mare Island boys here, Kent and Ryan, I found out that it was their 10-year anniversary coming up, and we got to talking about it. I had a ton of fun with you guys when you did your Brewing Network podcast with me.
So did we.
Same.
Yeah.
We talk about it all the time.
And so you guys had this idea like, hey, Mare Island, the place, has this unique and rich history. And then you two have 10 years of stories of starting a brewery and growing a brewery. And we kind of thought together, like, I think this makes a podcast series.
And we hope so. I mean, part of it for me was like, I just like to sit down and reminisce with Ryan, and 10-year anniversary is a chance to do this. I don't know if 12 people are going to listen to this or 12 million, but
Right, yes.
I think we're going to have a hell of a good time.
I mean, I think another reason is 10 years just flew by so fast. I need to kind of look back and just take a pause and see, what the hell did we just do?
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, no doubt.
For me, it's just a chance to drink beer on a weekday.
No. It sounds like a good customer to me.
Yeah. Well, I did say to you guys back during our podcast on the Brewing Network that I really enjoy it lately. I've been doing this for almost 20 years. When I get to talk to entrepreneurs and brewers about something other than beer, to be quite honest. And your podcast was just like that because of the rich history. And so now we're going to intertwine all of that rich history with the brewery's history. And I think that's just going to be a lot of fun, certainly for me. So whether we have one listener or 100,
right.
We're telling these stories together.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, this business is going to kill me, and I got 2 young kids. I want to make sure they understand what killed me through this. So, this is a good package, kind of self-serving.
An audio record of just that.
Like your gravestone will just have a little link to the podcast.
Right.
I listen to NPR all the time. I don't know if we're going to be putting this in the Library of Congress, but that'd be great.
All right, perfect.
So how do we start to tell this story?
Well, I mean, the best thing to do is we got to open up a beer, and no better beer to open than the Saginaw Golden Ale here.
There we go.
Oh,
There it is.
Yeah. Here you go, Kent.
Thank you. Pour away.
So, yeah, the Saginaw here is the first beer we came out with, and it's got such an interesting story, Fortner. Why?
All right, we start out with history.
I mean, I guess. Why?
This is one of my favorite history stories in all of Mare Island. So when we made our very first beer, we wanted to name it after the first ship that was built on this incredible shipyard that we namesaked our brewery after. So went down to the local historical society, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it was the Saginaw." And Ryan was like, "Yeah, that's a great name. Let's go with the Saginaw."
Although Saginaw is also from Michigan. We're not from Michigan, so but it's a good name. It's a good start.
It's true. And we started looking at the history of the Saginaw. It's this crazy story where the Saginaw was built. It was a sailing ship that became a sidewheeler. It fought Confederates. It fought pirates. It was doing mine sweeping. It was over in China. And this is 1860s. This is way before radio. They were in Midway Island on their way back to Mare Island, this ship. It had 169 sailors aboard, if my history is correct. And maritime custom back then was to stop by this little atoll called Green Island, which was tiny, and it was famous for shipwrecks and famous for castaways. So if you were in the military, you stopped back by this island and you were supposed to check and see if there was any castaways. So the Saginaw's doing its duty, chock full of all these sailors. They blow the tidal calculations. They end up wrecking on the rocks in slow motion on this island. The ship gets destroyed. But they all got off of the ship, and they got all the provisions off the ship, and they got the captain's skiff, which was a whaleboat, off of this ship. And now they're standing in the middle of the Pacific, and they have no idea whether they're going to be able to get rescued or not. And they decide, we're going to take this captain's skiff, we're going to build some sails on it, and 5 sailors offer to sail this thing. It was 1,500 miles from there to the Hawaiian Islands to initiate a rescue. And so they're like, yeah. So they build the sails. They get out. On day 2, they get swamped by a rogue wave. It soils all their provisions, soils all their water. And they sail for 29 days, catching water off the sails. They tried to kill each other. They got sick. They caught flying fish in the boat. That's how they kept their nutrition up. And they end up getting to what is the modern-day Princeville Hotel in Kauai, if you've ever been to Hawaii. And as they're pulling into Hawaii to initiate this rescue, they capsize. 4 of them perish. Oh, no. One guy, his name is William Halford. He finds his way ashore. He goes and finds King Kamehameha. King Kamehameha sends a steamship, rescues the other 164, if my math is right, that are left on the island. And William Halford was awarded the Medal of, I always get this
Honor.
mixed up. Honor. I always get this mixed up. Thanks, Ryan. That's why you're such a good partner.
He's buried on the island, and it's written on his grave.
So he won the Medal of Honor for having done all this. And William Halford was a Vallejo native, buried in the Mare Island Cemetery. So fast forward, we're releasing our very first bottles of Saginaw.
Yeah. So with this beer, first off, the style of beer we were trying to figure out, it was going to be a golden ale, because a lot of the workers from Mare Island, since it had shut down back in 1996, were a little older, Budweiser, kind of more domesticated style beer. So we wanted to come out with a craft beer that is an entryway for them. But I was working at the tap room, and this young man, local guy, comes in, and we've got an awesome, diverse town in Vallejo, and this young man walks in. He's got half of his hair is dyed in cheetah print, the other half is green. He had gauges in his ears, but the last thing I'm going to do is judge this young man. So I go up and ask him, "Hey, how can I help you?"
I'm sure if he was 21 or not.
I definitely had to check his ID. But but of course he's had the softest tone when he's talking to me. He's like, "I'm just wondering, do you guys have that Saginaw? Are you going to bottle that up?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, we're making plans for it right now. It's awesome that you love it. Can I get you a Saginaw?" He's like, "Well, I definitely want one, but I just want, it's kind of cool that you guys have that beer, because William Halford's my great-great-grandfather."
Wow. The guy who's buried in the cemetery.
And I literally, just like right now as I'm saying it, hair on my arm shoots up. I don't, the instant history in front of me, and then trying to realize that this young man wants to, have a beer that's honoring his family, that, Kent and I put a lot of work into to make sure we did it right. And clearly it hit the mark, because he even came back later and said, we actually have some Halfords in Australia, and we sent some of the beer out to them as well. So It's just really awesome that you guys are really helping the family legacy here with that.
And if you weren't sure that you were onto something by that point, that had to really solidify that you guys had chosen the right place, the right path, the right method of your dream.
And funny enough is, as we were getting it started, a lot of the locals were kind of wondering, like, why is this guy from Maryland, myself, and Kansas, Kent, telling our story here in Vallejo? And it really became clear that people understood, okay, the story needs to be told, and these guys can do it.
Vallejo's a tough place to get street cred, and we got it pretty fast just because of our dedication to history that was going on, which was fun.
It's true.
So how did you guys meet? Because I do want to talk about why you chose Mare Island and where this dedication to history came from. But quickly, how do you even know each other?
Well, we always like to say we met on a crush pad up in Napa.
Wine.
Yeah,
wine.
Right. So we're both winemakers by trade, and
were.
Well, no, Kent actually still is.
Okay, all right.
I'm still a winemaker by trade.
Yeah, you never let it go. But Kent has a small brand called Road 31 Pinot Noir, and I was assistant winemaker at this winery called White Rock up in Napa. Shout out to the Van den Driesches on that.
Best family in the wine business.
Fantastic wine, fantastic location, and good people. And Kent actually is a custom client and makes his wine there. And so, as being assistant winemaker, well, one thing, Kent does all of his own work, and he puts all the effort into it. But we became fast friends, and I would oversee the lot when he wasn't there. And what was that? 2007?
That sounds about right.
Yeah, so quite a while ago. On that.
Yeah, and we just got to be really good friends on it. And Ryan, we're just both fermentation guys, is what it comes down to, and have a very similar, just a more modern day, like just yesterday, Ryan's still my favorite person to taste with. I had this kind of tricky winemaking decision I had to make, and we're sitting down at the break table in the brewery, and we've got 10 glasses of wine in front of us, and all the brewers and everybody else walk right by, and they don't even bat an eye. They're like, "Oh, I know what these guys are doing."
Just normal.
But we got to know each other through the wine biz, and then we kind of went our separate paths there for a while. I was basically just starting a family is what was going on. I think Ryan was flying all over the world.
Yeah, I'm 10 years younger than you,
yes.
So I still had a career to figure out at that time. And with the wine industry, I kind of moved to Napa to jump into it without previous experience. So it was in my best interest to travel around the world and get more experience quicker. So I got to gallivant around the globe and
And meanwhile, my wife and I, we had one kid. We had another kid on the way. We were living I thought it was a perfectly sized house, but I think it was a little too small in retrospect. And my wife said, we need a bigger house. And I said, all right, go see what you can find. She's walking around Napa and she calls me and she's like, I can't find anything for less than $1.4 million. And I was like, well, that dog doesn't hunt. We're not doing that well. And she went down and found this old officer's quarters built in 1916, remodeled in 1921. If you know the San Francisco Presidio, you know the style of home that this is. It's this amazing home. Hadn't been lived in, though, for 15 years. It had squatters in it. Every window pane was broken in the entire thing. There was a orderly's quarters that was sitting on blocks in the backyard about a foot outside the back kitchen window. And she comes home and she's like, I found her house.
And it's like, only $1.2 million.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, it was, in retrospect, I thought it was cheap at first. And then honestly, we bought it. And that was right before the whole mortgage crisis in 2007.
Oh.
During escrow, we rode that thing to about 50% of its value. But it is a magical house. We put like 2 years and all of our work into it. Anyway, long story short, I go down to the Historic Society and I'm like, hey, we just bought this. And they're like, you bought Quarters U. And I was like, oh, it's got a name? And they're like, yeah, it's called Quarters U. And I'm like, cool. And that's when I got into history. That's actually when we learned about the Saginaw and all this different stuff.
Okay.
And the city sort of forefathers came to me and they're like, hey, what do you think about moving your winery down from Napa Valley down to Mare Island? I said, well, my wine folks, they're all kind of wearing penny loafers and ascots, and they like seeing all these vines on the sides of the hillsides. I think they'd be down there on Mare Island and be looking at these cranes and being like, what the hell's up with those cranes?
Yeah.
But my brewing buddies, they would be like, check out those cranes. And so I wrote a business plan for a brewery on Mare Island, and I had some brewing experience, but not commercial. I just love fermentation.
Closet home brewer.
And then the problem was economy melts down. I set it on a shelf, and I just not forgot about it, but I was like, whatever. And it was years later, Ryan and I reconnect after he's been flying all over the world.
And I think it was up in Napa. I was up at the Oxbow, and we just crossed paths.
Ritual Coffee.
Ritual. And you had said to me, you're like, hey, where are you making wine these days? It was kind of a funny one. And then at that time, kind of randomly transitioned. I had moved on and transitioned to beer, and I was brewing at Lagunitas at that time. So
and I remember asking, it's like, so Ryan, what do you think of the brewing world? And he's like, well, I love it, but I kind of like to make more money, and I kind of like to work for myself. I'm like, well, hang on. And so I go get the business plan. This is a couple of days later, and I'm blowing the dust off of it.
Yeah.
And we sat down, and Ryan's like, I'm game, and I'm like, let's do it. And so that's literally how we end up starting the brewing company with Ryan's expertise from Lagunitas, 2 fermentation guys who generally know what they're doing. We've got brand history, we've got compliance, we've got all the different things we need. And for me, it was really nice because I'd been making wine quite a few years then, and I still love it, still make wine, but this was just far enough outside the wheelhouse to be exciting, but close enough to the wheelhouse that it wasn't terrifying. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. But it's still a brewery. And, 10 years ago, a brewery was still a $1 million proposition, wasn't it? I mean, what was your business plan?
That's a funny transition.
Well, we didn't have 2 nickels to rub together at the time, so we got to warn you on that one.
I mean, I actually was thinking of this story on the way over here today. Is that I still remember when Kent called me up. I was working night shift at Lagunitas, and so I was a newer guy, and night shift. I don't know any of you blue collar workers out there working night shift. Hats off to you, Saginaw tip to you as well. But
cheers.
You're just kind of living a fuzz, and the altered reality is incredible. But I remember I'd gotten off of a night shift, and Kent reached out to me and he said, "Hey, can you meet me down in Vallejo? There's this property we want to look at maybe for the tap room." And I was like, okay, sure. Got excited, got in the car and drove down. And as we pulled into the ferry parking lot, because he told me to meet at the front room there, and we get out and we pleasantries, and we're walking towards the waterfront, and I'm assuming he's going to point across to Mare Island and point out the building where we're going to be.
Yeah.
And then we just turn around and look at the ferry tap room right there, the ferry building where it is, which has become the ferry tap room. And with that kind of just started the whole, all right, this is where it's going to be.
So you opened the tap room before you had a brewery.
We opened the tap room before we had a brewery.
Okay.
And honestly, the original plan was just to kind of do wholesale and keep this thing kind of very nimble. But then this space, nobody had been in it for 7 years. Vallejo had gone through, and this is a whole nother podcast, but Vallejo had gone through some really, really tough times. They had been
including
in
a bankruptcy,
exactly,
right? Yeah,
exactly. And this space, literally looking out over the water. And if you come there today, you're like, wow, this is like $1 million location. This is phenomenal, 180 degree views. Nobody had wanted to rent that space for 7 years. And so we got it, frankly, for a song. We rented it out. And we started with the Ferry Tap Room as our sort of front of house, how we're going to sell the beer to everybody. And what's funny is the original plan was Ryan standing behind the bar, 4 beers on tap, popcorn machine, and a hot dog machine.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one thing we didn't mention in here is through all of my winemaking, whatever, is I always sling tables at night. So I always supplemented my career aspirations by waiting tables at night and had tons of years of experience in restaurants. So that was another thing bringing to the table. And so that was it. I was like, I'll just manage this little space. I'll probably get a busser. I'll get another bartender, maybe a dishwasher, and then we'll just service the ferry goers and maybe a couple community members. And
sure,
boy, were we wrong.
Yeah, we had a business model that called for X amount of revenue over the first year, and by like month 3, I mean, we got bum rushed.
Oh wow!
We opened the doors, and it was crazy, and we had hit that revenue projection in like 3 months, and so we quickly had to kind of get things ramped up. But we were also brewing at the same time, and we had the keys to Carneros Brewing Company, rest in peace, and Ryan would go. I mean, this makes it sound like Ryan's doing all the work, and frankly, he was back then. I mean, I was handling all the leases and the insurance and a lot of the branding, and we were painting together, we were doing all sorts of stuff. But the Carneros Brewing Company.
Yeah, I think the bigger thing is the way we kind of describe our partnership is I make the money and Kent makes it make sense.
Okay.
Yeah. So with that, a lot in the beginning of this, Kent still had a day job and I still had a night job. But one of the things I was is 10 years younger than Kent, so I could maybe survive on 4 hours of sleep.
Yep.
And so there was a lot of the grunt work, and not to mention, I was just super stoked to be owning my own brewery in a partnership that I was willing to put 20-hour days in, no problem.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, we ended up with a little partnership at Carneros Brewing Company. I knew the Sejas from the winemaking industry, and when we were getting started, Kent and I are obviously I met him through contract winemaking, and we just assumed, well, we'll just find a contract brewer. And the fact that the Sejas had the Carneros Brewing Company, I went and let them know, hey, I'm thinking of doing a brewery. Would you guys be up to a contract? And we came out with a deal, and it was a very special deal because I had a key and I gave him a check, and
wow.
that was all that happened. So we actually did all of our work there. But I mean, it was a great start to work on a 7-barrel system and kind of get it started while the tap room was going. And it was just a really, I guess, a safer entry instead of that $1 million brewery plunge, which you were talking about.
Absolutely. Well, this is a good time for us to take a little break. I think we've gotten to an excellent part in the story where we're getting to know you guys, and I want to know what happens next, because you're standing in that ferry tap room looking across the water at what will become your eventual brewery home.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right. That story and more when we come back.
All right, Ryan, during this break, I asked Max, our marketing man, if he would write up a little ad for us that you could read cold in the air. So I'm going to hand this laptop to you, and you are to start reading, and go.
Okay, great. Let's try this here. This episode is brought to you by Saginaw Golden Ale, the first and only beer to be made without the use of horse parts. That's right. With a smooth, delicious flavor and 100% horse-free, Saginaw Golden Ale is the cure to whatever ails ya. So save a horse and put some sag in your swag. Reach out for a can of Saginaw Golden Ale. That was ridiculous.
Well done, Max. Well done.
Welcome back to Battleships to Beer. 10 years of Mare Island Brewing Co., and I'm here with Kent and Ryan talking about the history of the Mare Island Brewery and Mare Island itself. We're going to intertwine all of those things. And where we just left off, you guys opened a tap room in a place that had been vacant for 7 years, but you're telling me you kind of opened the doors to instant success?
Yeah, I mean, the ferry lands right at our doorsteps. It comes from San Francisco and lands there. So we just assumed, at the time, there was 500,000 ridership, wasn't it, at the time? Yeah,
correct.
So that was just an easy, like, hey, okay, it's going to be whatever. But we didn't even touch into the ferry riders as far as customers when we opened. I mean, when we were building it out, we had a interesting architect that did all of the plans, and he hand drew every change of plans. So we had to not only wait for it, then we had to wait for him to get copies of it. And so anyway, we had all of these plans after the iterations, and when you're building something, you usually see the brown butcher paper in the windows coming soon, and it was clear that this was going to be something exciting for Vallejo, so we just put all of those old iterations of the plans on the windows, and as I was in there building it out, man, I get a knock on the door probably every 30 minutes of waterfront walkers saying, we're just so excited you guys are coming. And so the energy and the buzz was there. And it was just one of those things where we felt it coming, but we didn't understand that bum rush, as you called it.
I guess we did a little bit of market research, and we went around. And I remember one of the biggest things we had going was like, holy cow, there's nobody selling pints over $4 in all of Vallejo. and we were going to have to come out at standard craft beer pricing, $6, $7, now it's creeped up much higher. And I was like, are these warm waters we're fishing in? Like this could be, we're going to be double everybody else's pint costs or whatever. But we had a guy, Jim Rakowski, quite a character, good friend.
Jim.
And Jim had an office in the ferry building. He was part of Visit Vallejo. And like pretty much every day, and he had counted, it's 25 steps from his desk to our front door. And he was waiting for us to open. And he's just a great, great guy. And he would come check on us pretty much every day and see if we were going to open. And sure enough, when the doors opened, he was our very first customer standing right there, which was awesome. And then he comes in. 4 more people come in, 10 more people come in, 20 more people come in. The next day, we got like 100 people coming through. And literally, we thought we were going to get like 30 or 40 people just kind of stopping by off the ferry to grab a pint or something. And as Ryan said, and I think this really speaks to, you mentioned earlier, Justin, like, when were we onto something? The branding of the Saginaw Golden Ale and realizing how deep and rich this history is. When we saw these people, and they were from Vallejo, they weren't hesitating to buy a craft beer pint at $7 or $8. They were so proud of what we were doing, and every one of them told us their story. We listened to stories, and I don't mean to say that negatively. Yeah. And at the time, there were World War II vets stopping by. Absolutely. Now, they're all gone now because it's been 10 years. And
we've got one left.
90s.
Okay.
They're not all gone.
Yeah.
But they would come by and, they wanted to tell their story, and damn it, we wanted to hear it.
Of course.
It was fascinating. And someone would come in wheelchairs and different things and be like, I was on Mare Island during, and I did this. And oh my gosh, we were like, wow, it was overwhelming. And I was realizing, well, one, Ryan needs to quit his night job and he needs to go 100% into this. And I've got to compartmentalize what I'm doing because on the side, because we're really onto something here.
Yeah, right. I was going to say the one thing that was very interesting and what we found out fast is that Vallejo has passionate people. They're very passionate. But one thing is not a lot of people have bet on Vallejo. I don't know if you know the town's motto is City of Opportunity.
Okay, I didn't know
everybody
that.
Always says that. A lot of locals will be like, there's just so much potential here and there's not many people doing it. Well, Kent and I realized we were that potential. And this opportunity was something that the locals not only needed, they wanted. They wanted us. And even more so, it was very clear at the beginning too, like we were being interviewed hard by the locals there. It's like, who are you guys, again, telling our story? And me and the bartenders at the time, we kind of had a little internal game going on. It was like the most entitled Vallejan. You'd be like, I've got a 4th generation Vallejan whose grandma worked on during World War II, and his uncle died in Building 37. He's moved up the charts here. So
right.
But they were really just questioning, are you going to do it right? And then 4 months later, everybody's like, these are our guys. Okay. This is our town. You guys do it proud.
You have to, we should talk about Vallejo another time, but
for sure.
It's a fascinating town in that I guess sociology would be the word, is it was run by the Navy. The Navy made the weather around there, not just the economy. And so when the Navy moved out in 1996, it just devastated the town. But people still had this. They were proud. There was a lot of industrial grit, real blue collar pride that goes on in that town. But they were used to there being this kind of higher economic power that just sort of moved everything around town, and it disappeared. It was gone. And so the entrepreneurial spirit wasn't, frankly, really there. It was much more of an industrial spirit, if you will.
Sure.
And so when we came on, we had to battle a few things. We had to, kind of change some people how we were doing it. But we've always tried to, I know this sounds hubristic, but try to lead by example and be like, we're going to try to do this right in a certain way. And it took us a while to win everybody over, but I think both our business practices, our community practices, what we do personally, we both live in the community, which is a lot of people that work in Vallejo don't live in the community of Vallejo. And then honestly, our salvaging of artifacts, our attuned nature to history was really huge.
So let's talk about that, because obviously, Kent, you're not just a winemaker and a brewery owner. You're the president of the Mare Island Historical Society?
Yeah, the Mare Island Historic Park Foundation. I have the honor of I'm on my 3rd year being president of that historic society, yes.
Okay. So you were always, I guess, a history buff, and you became fascinated with these stories.
I'll qualify that a little bit. I think Ryan and I have equal interest in history. I won't say that I was actually a history buff until I got to Mare Island and was like, oh my God, I'm living in this place where all these amazing world-changing things happen and nobody knows about this. It's a travesty that nobody knows about it.
Yeah.
And of course, we're kind of on to, wow, this, the Saginaw Golden Ale, people are drinking it because we're making kick-ass beer, but they're also drinking it because they love this story, and they're also drinking it because it's the pride of Mare Island, and we've got William Halford, and we've got his great-grandson, and all this different stuff. And I was like, we need to invest back in the community, and this is one way we can do it, is to help uphold the history.
Okay.
There's another, it's a ticking clock. This history is disappearing very fast. There's a developer on the island, and they're doing a fine job. I don't mean to sound like they're not concerned with history, but they're developing the island.
Mm-hmm.
All these people that lived and worked on Mare Island, they're passing on. They're going away. And all these stories, there's so much on Mare Island. And so we're in a race to chronicle that history. And part of it is to chronicle it in beer, on labels, in the website, and all these different things. The other part is, and Ryan and I talked about this at great lengths, you know what? Let's dedicate some of our sort of philanthropic time to supporting the history on the island. And so I got involved with the board, and next thing I know, I'm president of the board over there. And I mean, Ryan is very kind in some ways, and I think he understands the investment. Like, I probably spend, 5 to 10 hours a week just working on the history of Mare Island that, it comes back to us in a way, but it's really about, let's capture this while we got the shot.
I mean, it's the greater good of our business, in essence. And, I say all the time, this current generation, everything's so quick, fast, throw away, TikTok, Snapchat, etc.
Yeah.
And history is definitely one of those things people aren't slowing down and listening to. And so one thing we realized early is people definitely slow down and listen over a beer. So if I have you captured over that beer, I'm going to tell you a story.
Sure.
And honestly, it's that story that carries out of there, because yes, we make good beer, but people will tell somebody else, man, I had this beer, but the story of the Saginaw was just incredible. You're not going to believe this. And so that story, what I've said now is, we're a brewing company. We're actually more of a history company, and the beer's our widget. Like, we just have the responsibility to tell these stories appropriately for the community and make sure we're giving them the right song and, of course, great beer.
And so you've sort of ended up through that with this kind of mini museum.
In essence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the foundation ran the museum. The museum, it had a building that honestly needed $20 million of work on it. And so it's had a really rough time. They've got artifacts there and everything else, but they can't really take on any more artifacts. And meanwhile, we're kind of high profile because we're selling hooch, in town and everything. And people start showing up and handing us, my, Uncle Lou passed away, and this was his uniform, and this was his sword. And I was on Mare Island and I did this. Here's a photo and all this stuff. And at first we were like, bring it on. And now we actually have a warehouse that we pay for, and one of the rooms in it's called the history room, and it's just chock full of all these things that eventually will go to the foundation if we find a new home for the museum, or it finds its way onto our the walls of our tap room, and everything. So if you come into our tap room, we have really cool historical pictures on the wall, and we spent a lot of time curating those. I mean, one of my favorites is when I first moved to the island with my wife and we're working on this house, I go down and there's this building, and this building is it had become the laundry facility, and before that it was the World War I sailors pool hall, and it had become the laundry facility later, and they were demolishing it, and I was like, and it was made of redwood. And I was like, what are you going to do with all that wood? And they're like, well, we're hauling it away. It's just going to get destroyed. If you want it, you can have it, but you got to get it tonight. And I was like, wow. I go home, talk to my wife, and I'm like, hey, I got to rent a U-Haul, and we're going to get a bunch of lumber. So we started collecting things like this, and that kind of lumber, along with other reclaimed lumber we had, has found its way onto the walls of the Ferry Tap Room. So even though you don't know that when you're drinking in the Ferry Tap Room, you were surrounded by reclaimed lumber that had sailors from World War I used to play pool in that. And I think somehow it comes through the beer, it comes through the brand, all that stuff. And the folks of Vallejo, they have long memories, and they remember this kind of stuff, and they understand it. And I think it bought us some street cred.
Sure. It's not just some strange decoration choice that you guys
I was going to say, the one thing is, it's very clear our aesthetic is trying to be curated. All of the stuff, we could spaghetti it on the wall and look like, the dive bar, and there's just plenty to look at all the time, but no curation or no story. But, there's just so much to say. We had to, high spot the really awesome stories to at least invite people in and introduce them to just such a wealth of history. When we started, everybody really wanted to make sure that we told the story right. And so our responsibility became not just two guys wanting to start a brewery. I mean, you can put a period right there. It was, how can we actually remove ourselves away from this? And we now have an entity that it's got its own path, and we have to foster that for the community instead of, Kent and Ryan's ego. And that has been a really really awesome and rewarding path for us to be able to.
And it's interesting when we've had to hire marketing people. We've got this awesome director of marketing now, Max, and we had to sit down with Max. We're like, look, there's a box around this brand, and it is very, very distinct. And the history and the style and everything lives within that box, and we don't go outside of it. And there's been quite a few times where, frankly, some brewer that was working for us, or when a marketing person's come to us and been like, let's put a flaming mermaid on the side of the can. They're selling like mad, and we should do a triple IPA, not to insult anybody doing a triple IPA out there or whatever, all this different stuff. And we're like, that doesn't fit our brand because we really have to stay true to the history that we're doing. Right?
And it sounds like none of this in the beginning for you guys was really intended. I mean, I'm not saying that it completely caught you off guard, but it sounds like the brand took on a life that you didn't plan for it. It planned it for you.
I think that's fair. We certainly had the vision in the path, but it definitely narrowed the lane of which way it needed to go.
I see. Yeah.
So we were looking in the right direction. We just didn't understand how narrow we could get in there and actually still have something exciting as we do.
We also, we are brand guys. I'm a brand guy. And I was like, this is just such rich, like, I don't have to make up any names. I can just go down to the museum and thumb through a few magazines and find 1,000 names down here. And so I felt like it was ripe with content. I didn't realize the fervent, almost cult-like subscription that people have to what we're doing. And so I think we had the idea. I don't think we realized the idea would go where it would go.
Sure. Right. And that's kind of what I meant. And to me, that's also a brand guy. That's a blessing. Like you want your brand to have its own life.
Absolutely.
And not all of them do. And there's plenty of successful, not just breweries, but businesses where the brand isn't exactly the life. Sometimes the brewer is the life. Sometimes all of the life is in the can, right? But when the brand itself is almost living and breathing like that, I just think it's the coolest thing. Like that stuff excites me about being an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
because it's coming now from outside of you, and I just think that that's really cool.
Yeah, and when I go around the world, tasting different beers, stuff like that, like I went to Guinness, and you could say that Guinness is very commercial now and everything else, but going to St. James Gate and having it at the source and all the history behind it and everything, like that's super cool. And not to be too grandiose, but we're on 10 years now of this. We've always talked about we want a 30, 40, 50-year brand is what we want. And I think if we called it Kent and Ryan's Excellent Brewing Adventure, we never would have, we might have done really well for 3 or 4 years, but we probably wouldn't be sitting here at year 10. And
I'd like to say we're not as interesting, but here we are on a podcast. So hopefully we are.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to take a real quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to find out how you guys actually ended up with a brewery. Hang in there. We'll be right back. Hello, podcast listeners. We want to thank you for listening to Battleships to Beer, and we hope you're enjoying it. If you'd like to reach out with any questions about this episode, Mare Island history, or, of course, the beer, email us at podcast@mareislandbrewingco.com. That's podcast@mareislandbrewingco.com. We'll do our best to get you answers, and your questions could appear in a future episode of Battleships to Beer. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to Battleships to Beer, 10 years of Mare Island Brewing Co. I'm still here with Kent and Ryan, of course. And so we've talked about the Ferry Tap Room. And all of this time, it's not lost on me that you're not yet on Mare Island, but you're the Mare Island Brewing Company looking across to it. You've got this incredible branding. How did the support come from the community of Vallejo and then eventually Mare Island for you guys? Through the brand, through the beer? What were you seeing?
Well, one thing, our logo that we have is, we derived it from the original Mare Island logo, and so it has already its own history, and it's very known throughout the community. If you see that horse head, you kind of know what it is. So we already had some identification with the locals, so it was very clear we need to get this on some merchandise. I got to get this on some T-shirts, on some hats, and so. Yeah, I was gonna say. I remember going to Kent and like, hey, I need to get some merchandise. What's kind of the budget of this? And you had said,
well, I think you originally had an order for $5,000 in merchandise.
Oh yeah,
it would sell for like $10,000 on the shelf, and I was like, Ryan, you're nuts! Like $500. That's the budget. We don't have $5,000, and so give him a $500 to go out and by the
Truth
way,
be told, I got him to $1,500 on that.
Well, and just as some perspective, as a business owner myself, $5K sounds like a lot of money. It's not a lot of merch.
No.
Merch is so expensive.
So expensive.
Yeah.
So you got up to $1,500.
Got up to $1,500,
Okay.
and I aptly called it Ryan Crombie and Fitch.
Ryan Crombie and Fitch.
Nice.
And so we got the first little order in, and I'd say in 3 days, sold out.
Oh, wow.
Sold out.
Wow.
We put it.
We're
on
just talking hats and shirts here.
hats and T-shirts. Yeah, nothing too fancy. It was enough to just say, "Hey, Fortner, I think we've got a little opportunity here. Give me a little
my
bit.
bad.
Open the purse a little bit, and then let's see how it goes." And after that, Ryan Crombie and Fitch has 17 locations in the Bay Area. No, not at all. But but the merchandise, I mean, it's pretty crazy to just walk around and see people that you don't even know with a hat on.
Oh yeah, I've been to New York City. I've seen somebody walking along, Seattle. I saw somebody in the Bahamas once when I was on vacation wearing our stuff. And it does speak to this sort of latent pride in what Mare Island accomplished, which we're going to talk about in a future episode, but what Mare Island accomplished as a shipyard for 140 some odd years, and all these families that live there and everything else, and then it goes into bankruptcy, the whole town does, and all that pride was just sort of latent. And so as soon as we slapped that logo onto a t-shirt, people would buy it on anything. And again, it just spoke to, my gosh, we have tapped into an amazing thing, and we have a lot of responsibility around this. We got to be really careful so that we're very careful, just like the box around our brand. We have a serious box around our merch as well, and Ryan has managed that all the way through. And where it became really clear that this brand has legs is through that merchandise. I mean, I remember getting an email from somebody in Connecticut that said, "Hey, it's my favorite uncle's birthday next month, and he spent 6 years on Mare Island and loved it and always talks about it. And so I was doing some research, found out you guys started a brewery. Is there any way I can get a T-shirt out here?" We don't advertise out there, and so
Amazing.
It was through his research finding it of this small brewery in Vallejo. And again, we were so young and dumb, and just excited that somebody across the country had found us. I mean, it was incredible.
So how long are you in the Ferry tap room before you have your own brew house?
Ooh, so we opened in June of 2014, so that's why we're 10 years here coming up. And we had opened the Ferry tap room then, but we also had started a warehouse in the coal sheds where actually our brewery is now. So we needed some warehouse on Mare Island. But it wasn't until, let's see, it was about 2015 when we started really thinking like, okay, we can't keep doing these contract brews. We're not going to be able to keep up. In fact, we even opened up a secondary contract down in San Jose with Strike. I mean, Strike, you guys were awesome. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
I mean, you guys really saved our butts in that expansion. And then, Kent and I started being like, okay, how are we going to build a brewery?
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because so on Mare Island, there's a series of these 9 turtle-humped buildings is what they look like from the side. And they stored coal for the steamships back between 1898 and 1906. And then they had been converted after we no longer used coal for the steamships. They had been converted into shipwrights and electrician and all this stuff. And we had a crazy cast of characters that was nearby us. We can talk about that another time. But there was this coal shed number 151, and we rented it. And I think our lease was like $220 a month or something like that. And we were only
overpaid.
We were only leasing a corner of it. And we had a woman named Elise, God bless her, who was working for admin for us, like, 10 hours a week or something like that.
She was our part-time superhero.
She was part-time superhero was her title. And she, the bathroom was on the other side of the coal sheds. There was no lights between here and the bathroom. This bathroom was somewhere where 100,000 Navy sailors had used this bathroom over the years.
And just for context, the bathroom didn't have good lighting either. And I remember in one of the stalls, it said Larry Bird rules. And so it kind of really framed the time frame of somebody being in the bathroom and just really stoked about Larry Bird in the 80s and decided to scrawl it on there. So
we're in this old office for a shipwrights place or whatever. And I mean, this building it's just shy of a David Lynch movie. I mean, this thing is really there. And it would rain, and when it rained literally in the building. The ceiling was so bad, but it was super cheap rent. It was this place to kind of have a spot,
and it was our authenticity on the island.
There was a lot of authenticity, and then the developer on the island, who basically controls all of the main part of the development on the island, this is a National Historic Landmark that we're in, and they have to redo this National Historic Landmark. And I'm at because I bought one of the old homes on the island, I kind of know these guys relatively well, and I hear them talking about what are they going to do with this National Historic Landmark. And I was like, well, what would you think about us being your cornerstone tenant? You redo the coal shed, we'll redo all the inside of it, and we need a brewery, and we'll put a brewery in there. And that was kind of the idea at like 9:30 at night, 3 cocktails deep that came out of it. And we started trying to figure out how we were going to, because we had to have a place to brew beer. We were running out of beer right and left. We didn't have much control over it.
The demand was high.
Demand was super high. Quality was good, but only because Brian was only sleeping 2 hours a night. He was running back and forth to all these breweries, and he was doing a great job, but it was completely unsustainable. There was no way this was going to work. And the part for me that was pretty wild is I had a really good banking relationship with, it used to be called Bank of Napa. It got by Bank of Marin. I can't plug your local community bank anymore. That's the best way if you're an entrepreneur to get involved, because you come to them and say, I've got an old 1898 coal shed that has, rains inside of it, and I want to build a brewery in there in conjunction with the developer who hasn't even done, various things. You only a community bank is going to do that. And the guy's like, well, I'll drive by it tomorrow. I'll take a look. And I'm like, okay. And so I went
You're
back.
like, maybe don't look at it.
Well, I went back to the meeting with them and I said, hey, what I want to know is how much money do we have to raise so that you'll kind of match it, or where are you going to come in that you could loan us so that we could build this brewery? And the coolest part of this whole thing is they looked over our finances, and I had a pretty good relationship with them, but they looked over our finances and they're like, you know what, you guys are kicking ass over there at the Ferry Tap Room. You're selling like mad. We understand that your cost of goods is going to go way down because you're going to start making it yourself rather than making these contract brewing places. Like, we'll loan it all to you.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was both like one of the coolest things I'd ever heard, and it terrified me. I remember going back to Ryan, I'm like, Ryan, they'll loan it all to us. Are you ready?
Moment in
Are you ready to go into major debt? And of course, we're signing on the dotted line that if this goes under, we're responsible for it.
And you got to realize at that time too, I was renting a house. I didn't own my house, so I'm like, I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Yeah. I mean, I was betting the family franchise on the whole thing when we did it, and we'll talk about it more in depth at another time. The coal shed was its own thing, but we had to have a place to brew. Of course, it had to be on Mare Island. And we wanted a place that was historic and everything else. And this amazing opportunity. And we had this great bank that was involved. And I just felt like all the planets had aligned and the skies had opened up and the sunshine had come down.
It's really incredible.
And this needed to happen.
And I think you're right in really plugging community bank. I mean, so I've tried to do it. I tried to do it with Chase Bank and Bank of America. Mm-hmm. I've opened a couple hop grenades by now. Not a dime from any of them. And at the time, the location we're sitting in now, where the studio is, we were also kicking ass. I mean, our financials were fantastic, and we were like, hey. And this was when tap rooms were opening left and right too. So we were really still on the upward trend. And no, the big banks, not even the time of day. If you didn't have enough, maybe they would have been better if we were a brewery because they had something to take back from us, right? But as a tap room, it just no collateral. And you thought that they'd listen to the story and look at the numbers. And they really didn't do either one. So I just think that's a great plug and a great, I don't even think it's a stroke of luck, Ken. I think it's a testament to the type of person you are, the relationship you built, and then, like you said, working with a community bank. It's amazing. And
we still have a great relationship with them. Like, in fact, we do this Yardbird happy hour once a month. And the woman who helped us kind of put all that together, she's since retired from the bank, but her and her husband come down and we drink with them and we talk back to it. And really, she was like, well, this was an investment in our community. We knew you guys were going to do well. It wasn't just finances, and this was going to help build up a community. So, yeah, I mean, I won't say all community banks are like that and everything else, but it was a hell of a find. Yeah. It was pretty amazing.
So you got the funding, and now you've got a sign on the dotted line, but you get to build yourselves a brewery on Mare Island.
Yep.
In a coal shed.
On the waterfront.
On the waterfront.
Which now, fast forward, by the way, it's just absolutely gorgeous, right?
We're very proud of it.
Yeah, very proud, and a lot of work for sure.
Oh my God. Yeah.
How long did it take to build the brewery?
I want to say it was definitely over a year. We started the planning process right after we realized the funding was there. And so the planning happened through, let's say, the beginning of 2016. And then we started, I think we broke ground in like August of 2016, and then didn't do our first brew until June 2017.
This is why when you get into business, I got to tell you, if you're an older person getting into business, find a partner who's 10 years younger than you, because he'll remember things like all these dates. I mean, I'm 54. Yeah. I'm not old, but Ryan's 44. And when we started this, I was 44 and he was 34. And I'll actually never forget going to pick up some tables to move them around the Ferry Tap Room. It was a heavy ass table because it was this super thick reclaimed lumber that we had.
Right. And
Ryan picked up his and like it was no problem. And I consider myself an athlete. I go to the gym and I could barely pick up mine. And I'm like, this was the right partner for me. Right. Find somebody stronger and younger and better memory.
I was gonna say, my favorite part of that story is is it's now 10 years later, and I've learned over 10 years how to now kind of coast and utilize the those around me younger.
There you go.
So,
Yeah.
You got to save up some of that energy.
Youth is wasted.
Well, you've made it 10 years, and we've got a lot of journey to talk about through this podcast series, and we're going to do just that. We're going to find out about more of the trials and tribulations, and we're going to learn a ton of history about Mare Island, and I'm really looking forward to it. What's up next for us?
Well, I think the plan, we're kind of making this up a little bit as we go along, but our general plan was we definitely want to dig a little deeper in the Mare Island history and just take this chance, if we got anybody listening, to tell them about it. So we've got a pig named Murphy.
Okay.
We've got an aircraft carrier landing.
And we've also got homing pigeons. I mean, there's Kevin, the pigeon we need to talk about. I'm sure he'll make an appearance.
Yep.
See, I told you, we've got so much in store for you on this podcast, and I'm looking forward to it. Gentlemen, thanks for being here and sharing your story with us. And
how should we end this off, Fortner? What do you think?
Well, we did have an idea. Justin, tell us if you think it's good. We were going to take turns. I got one question for Ryan, and he gets one question back at the next episode. Does that sound like a fair
yeah,
game?
You're just going to spring it on him?
Yeah, I have no idea what he's going to say.
And it's a pretty simple question. But, Ryan, I wanted to ask you, if we didn't do this, what would you be doing today?
Oh, my God. I'd probably be waiting tables somewhere in I don't know, Southern California or something, surfing. I'd like to think I'd still be in fermentation somewhere. I mean, that's where my heart is. That's one thing I've really appreciated about this relationship is the ability to create something with you. The crafting of it, the coming up with the product, the name, I mean, everything about that. So I think naturally I would have gravitated and still gone down this path. I was certainly thinking about starting a wine brand, but as you know, like starting a wine brand, you got to have 7 years worth of money ahead, and those 2 nickels that we started with was not going to do it. So yeah, I would still be in fermentation, but yeah, I don't think I would have had the successes I had with you and the ability and the freedom you allowed for us to create this. So
well, I just want to go on record, and this is part of why we want to do this podcast. I mean, I've had 6-7 different ventures. I've had partners in most of them. I've had most of them were fine. I've had one I barely survived, but I've never had something that thrived the way it did with Ryan. And we see eye to eye on the brand ethics, on the brand vision, and all the things that really matter. And then we're different enough, including being 10 years apart, that we can divide and conquer things like nobody's business. And it's been an amazing friendship, an amazing partnership. And I think a lot of our success is all these different things that come together, including being able to work side by side. So Ryan, I just want to say thank you.
Hey, thank you, Fortner. It's been a ride, and we're going to take you guys on the rest of it and tell you where the sentiment comes from, because it's a partnership, but it's been a friendship way before. So.
Yes, it has.
Can't wait for more. This has been Battleships to Beer, Episode 1, 10 years of Mare Island Brewing Company. Thanks for sticking with us. We'll see you next time. If you want to see historical and other photos to events referenced in this podcast, head on over to the Mare Island Brewing Company website at mareislandbrewingco.com or check out the link in the show notes for this episode.